If there are some positive changes that your daughter has experienced over the last, 2 years or so, those have to be acknowledged. So if you try to ignore the fact that her social transition may have played some sort of positive role, you make yourself less credible when you want to raise concerns with her. Because, of course, that's the ultimate goal, is just to raise your concerns, talk about some things that are, truthful about what you're seeing. But if you don't acknowledge the positive, you don't really have a lot of leverage to do that. So let's just think about this from her angle. She was suffering with a lot of insecurity and self-doubt. She wasn't feeling very confident, but now she's feeling more capable, she's feeling less weak, and yet her parents are very hostile towards her new identity. So if mom and dad can't acknowledge that something about this has helped her feel relief, how can she trust them when they warn her about future choices she has to make? I've talked about this a little bit in the past, but I want to just lift up this metaphor that I think is really powerful here. In many stories, fairy tales, we see that the protagonist has been given some kind of an object imbued with magical powers, whether it's like an amulet or a cloak or something like that. It's usually given to them by a wise teacher or some kind of magical, mythical figure. And they believe that this object is really giving them powers that they didn't have before. Usually in these types of stories, the protagonist will be facing some big pivotal fight scene or some kind of conflict where they really feel they're going to draw upon those powers in that object and they lose it, or it gets broken, or someone steals it, or they just don't have it. And of course, in these stories, what always happens is the protagonist realizes at some point that they had that power within themselves the whole time, and they end up, fighting the big scene or overcoming that obstacle, and they have been able to integrate that idea of getting powerful from this object into actually their own sense of self. So if we think about it that way, sometimes with the trans identity, it is this kind of cloak that kids get to wear that gives them a sense of protection, gives them a feeling of power that maybe they didn't know how to access before. So eventually, what you're hoping is that you want her to understand that bravery, the confidence, and the risk-taking that she's expressing now, those are just things she's doing. Like maybe the identity helped her at some point, but eventually you want her to realize she doesn't need the identity to do that. Mom alluded to this in her summary too. I think mom knows this. But if we can't acknowledge some of the ways that the identity might have been helpful at this particular period in time, it is serving some need she has, then it's going to be very hard to help her integrate those positive traits of bravery and confidence just into her own self as a female, as a girl. Another problem with this almost placebo effect that social transition can have is it can lead kids into the more is better fallacy. So the idea is, if dressing like a boy has helped me feel this confident, imagine how happy I'm going to be when I medically transition. Now, obviously, there is some sort of a bell curve on intervention and what it ends up doing to you and how you navigate the world at various stages of this process. Kids don't have the ability to see that because she feels like she's been lifted out of a hole of insecurity and self-doubt. So obviously, she probably thinks it's only going to get better from here. So that's why it's really, really important to acknowledge some of these positive changes, whether it's from antidepressants or from her identity. It's not clear what is what in her mind. We have to remember this is in her mind, but you have to acknowledge those so that you can help her come to these other places in her process and challenge this very likely fallacy that is going on in her mind, that if I am this much happier now, transition will only make me so much more happy and confident.